In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock released Psycho to widespread critical acclaim. 14 years later, in 1974, Bob Clark released the ahead of its time Black Christmas to mixed reviews, which would virtually all be retroactively changed to reflect the movie's now common regard as a classic. These two movies were the spark, the inspiration, for John Carpenter's 1978 classic Halloween, which in turn birthed Friday the 13th, which in turn birthed the slasher genre as a whole. As I talked about in my video covering The Intruder, Halloween spawned an explosion of copycats, and the movie industry churned out trashy classic after trashy classic. However, the slasher avalanche did not come without its victims. At the bottom of the pile are some terrific movies, at least in regards to their genre, that too often get forgotten about when swept up in talks about Jason and Freddy's finest moments. This series aims to cover as many of those movies as I possibly can.
Give me a mountain and nothing to do. Give me the sunshine, give me your dew.
The 80s were defined by a ton of terrible things. The AIDS epidemic, the war on drugs, Ronald Reagan. But through all of this, standing as an unwavering beacon of hope to a country in desperate need of one, was Tom Savini. I've talked about Savini a few times on this channel, but any horror fan worth his grain will tell you that covering a Savini movie means one thing: fantastic, practical gore effects. This is the effects god. I mean, just look at this man's body of work. And in spite that impressive of a resume, today we're covering the movie that Tom Savini himself has said he considers his best work, 1981's The Prowler, aka Rosemary's Killer. It was written by Neil Barber and Glenn Leopold, and directed by Joseph Zito, and it borrows pretty heavily from My Bloody Valentine, which was released just 8 months prior. It also draws a ton of inspiration from Friday the 13th, but really every slasher did back then. The movie begins in 1945 Avalon, California, although it's shot in New Jersey, as we're introduced to Rosemary penning a heartbreaking letter to her boyfriend, breaking up with him. We then cut to Rosemary attending a graduation dance with her new boyfriend Roy. It's a story as old as time. Boy meets girl, boy kisses girl in gazebo, serial killer impales boy and girl with a pitchfork. We've all heard it before. We cut to 35 years later, and college senior Pam is getting ready for her school's graduation ball. Is this something colleges used to do or something? Pam's love interest Mark, who's a cop, gross, has a meal with Pam as she expresses her concern for his safety. The sheriff is leaving for a fishing trip, which leaves Mark more vulnerable now that he'll be in charge. Also, kinda seems like it's not the best time for a vacation. Regardless, the scenes with Mark are kind of annoying throughout this movie, because anyone familiar with the genre can tell that he's a red herring.
Super! This is the place for spectacular store-wide savings. Super!
Back at Pam's dorm, Pam's moping about Mark with her friends Lisa and Sherry, who are all about to partake.
Any of you preacher girls got any rolling papers?
Post-sesh, we're introduced to Major Chatham and his creepy imposing house across the street. This movie is littered with red herrings and B-stories that get dropped without resolution, so don't expect that to go anywhere. Pam heads out and leaves Sherry behind to shower. It's in this shower scene that we're treated to our first non-flashback kill, as Carl gets destroyed with a knife through the head that pokes out his chin, eyes all rolling back. God damn. Sherry follows shortly after with a pitchfork take on Psycho's shower scene before we're taken back to the dance. Mark's there, red herring things. This time he dances with another girl right in front of Pam to some of the worst music I've ever heard. Just as Paul plays a little grab ass and spikes the punch. Mark's new girl spills some punch on Pam, and she heads back to the dorm to change. She somehow doesn't see Sherry's corpse, or I guess the Prowler, in the bathroom. Also, did he kill these two and then just kind of hang out in the bathroom until she got there? Why was he still there? Anyways, as she's leaving, Pam catches a glimpse of the killer and has an appropriate reaction. I love that. Until she runs into who else but Marky Mark. I don't know why, I just hate that guy. Mark marks up the place a bit before they decide to investigate Major Chatham's house. See, Major Chatham is the father of Rosemary, who we saw killed in our opening sequence, and the former mayor who banned these graduation dances in the first place. And honestly, maybe you guys should have listened to Mayor Herring. I mean Red Herring. I mean Major Chatham. Because I mean... While searching Chatham's house, they find evidence that not only is Rosemary his daughter, but that her killer was never found. Suspecting that the person who committed those crimes is the same goof out here goofing around in this army apparel tonight, they head back to the dance to warn the others, while Lisa takes a short-lived dip in the pool. And seriously, what a doozy this kill is. Look at this effect. There's so many different components here. Tom Savini's the man. Pam and Mark decide to investigate the cemetery where Rosemary is buried, but not before they're interrupted by the local shop owner Kinsley complaining about some horny kids making out in his basement or something. And as much as I can't stand Mark, give the guy a break. He's only in charge because the sheriff prioritized a fishing trip over the town's safety, but also ACAB, including Mark. They find Rosemary's grave dug up and Lisa's body in her place, and decide to return once again to Major Chatham's mansion, for the third time. In over his head, Mark finally decides to call the sheriff, but the person at the resort or whatever he's at is in no hurry to find him, so he just doesn't. They stumble around the house, splitting up because of course they would. Mark gets kidnapped and is seemingly moments away from being pitchforked in the face, and eventually Pam is chased around before being cornered in a small room. Out of seemingly nowhere, Kinsley pops up and saves the day with a well-timed shotgun blast. But of course, the Prowler pops on back up with a shotgun blast of his own. Pam tries to grab the gun, and in the resulting struggle, the Prowler's mask is misplaced, forcing him to remove it and reveal his identity as Sheriff Fraser. We all saw that coming, right? Still struggling with the shotgun, Pam eventually gains the upper hand and... Holy shit, his head exploded, dude! Sick! After the head explosion, we cut to Mark inexplicably being alive and giving Pam a ride home. I mean, seriously, what could have possibly stopped this killer from just shoving the pitchfork down here? But she arrives back at the dorm in time for one traumatic hallucination to wrap it up.
Electrolux, your home is the best place to see why we're better.
The Prowler isn't perfect by any means. Outside of Pam, none of the characters are particularly likable or relatable. The plot is largely derivative of My Bloody Valentine, as I said earlier. And the movie revisits locations and pads time with slasher tropes way more often than I'd like. However, we also get an outstanding final girl performance, brilliant pacing, and a really memorable killer. Not to mention, these movies exist to showcase kills. And to see the master at that craft operating at the upper bits of visibility makes this movie worth it alone.
Dessert the second night, still firm and fresh. Streusel swirl, the sensational 6-meal.
Anyways, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't yet. This weekend, I'm returning to the Sasquatch series for part 3, and man, I'm super excited. I know they don't perform well, but again, I think they're funny, and I really like making them. The next episode of this series will not be released until the end of August, when I either do Chopping Mall or House on Sorority Row. I haven't decided yet. But if you do like these kind of like decade-based looks at horror, the first week of August I'll be trying out another series with forgotten 70s gems, with The Town That Dreaded Sundown. August will also see the return of horror you probably slept on, and I don't know, a bunch of cool stuff. So anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay safe.